Good morning for those of you who are in the West Coast, and good afternoon for the folks who are in the East and in between. I'm Rosemary Bray McNatt, president of Star King School for the Ministry, and it is Wednesday, so it is time for us to be together on Facebook Live. I hope that you all had a tolerable week. I hate to make assumptions about what kind of weeks people are having. Um, I hope that you had some positive parts of your week, that things were better for you than last week, and that if you are struggling with this illness, that you are making progress and feeling better, and that if you are not struggling with this illness, that you're dealing with the isolation and the lack of energy and a host of other things that I think many of us are dealing with right now. I want to say good morning to Xander and to folks who are joining as we go forward in this really difficult time. I have just so many thoughts going through my head this morning. I am absolutely overwhelmed by the heroism of frontline people, the doctors, the nurses, the respiratory techs, the grocery clerks, and the folks in all the stores, and all the other things that, all the other institutions that we take for granted all the time. I think that something that really moved me the other day it was actually last night, was the line of people in a hospital on Staten Island who were applauding as a woman who had been in the hospital for 2 weeks struggling against COVID-19, the mother of five, was released from the hospital. And just to see the lines on either side of her as she was wheeled out, applauding all these different people. Some of them were holding mops, and some of them were holding stethoscopes, and some of them were just standing there cheering her on. And they cheered her as she went through the door to be embraced by her husband, who had not been able to be with her. Those are the things, those are the stories that are giving a lot of us encouragement and hope. And please don't be freaked out by my clearing my throat. I have allergies. And one of the things that makes this particular season more fraught, I think, is that all of us who are allergic to something are a little more vigilant about every little tickle, every little sneeze. But I've been isolating, or actually staying at home. So I'm not really worried about being ill right now, but I am worried about the fact that my throat keeps itching. Um, at the same time that I've been very encouraged by the heroism of so many people, and the stories just go on and on, I have been depressed, enraged by some of the other stories. The story of two black men who were asked to leave Walmart because they were wearing face masks. Now, if you're black, you knew this day was coming. You really did. Um, I think, and I hate to say it, my first thought was, well, at least they didn't shoot them, because frankly, that was one of my fears. It was just enraging at a time when all of us should be wearing protective homemade masks um, in some way or another when we leave the house, that people of color, and black people in particular, should once again be at risk in even greater ways than they already are. If you haven't been paying attention to some of the data, you also know that black people have been dying at disproportionate rates from COVID-19. And once again, it's not a surprise for anybody who keeps up with health disparities, who cares about social justice. But it's always disconcerting when these stories come close to home. When I saw that even though African Americans make up 30% of the population of my hometown, Chicago, that they account for 70% of the deaths from COVID-19. I was just floored by that. And it didn't help that this past weekend, my sister-in-law, who is lab tech and who has asthma, had to go to the emergency room for her breathing. They finally sent her home, and no one could be happier than me, except maybe my brother, because both of them are at high risk. So I am delighted that she was sent home. But it just speaks to the fact that everybody can't go home. And it is so obvious that so many of the things that the culture at large takes for granted, shelter in place, working at home, that someone like me can do easily, is not available to everyone, particularly people of color who overwhelmingly make up the other frontline workers whose lives are at risk so that we can live. If you work in a grocery store, if you are a delivery person, if you are a person who's cleaning streets or driving a bus, you can't work from home. And those are the people who are getting exposed to this virus and getting sick. And because the health disparities among people of color are greater, the illness itself, COVID-19, has a bigger impact on those people. Just looking at some of the stories about bus drivers who have complained in Detroit about the fact that they don't have protective equipment when they drive. And one guy got on Facebook talking about it, and 8 days later, he was dead. Those are the things that break my heart. And they're also the things that fuel my rage about justice and the importance of taking a larger look at what's happening. I just kept thinking about this old saying that my father used to have when I was growing up. He used to say, when white people get a cold, black people get pneumonia. And that's been running through my head. So what's been happening in all too many cases is that when white people get COVID-19 and struggle, a disproportionate number of black people get it and die. The need for justice and for a fundamental commitment to treating everyone with the same sacredness that we want to treat the people that we love most is, I think, key to the religious enterprise. And I think is one of the most important parts about being human. We talk about this a lot at Star King. We talk about this a lot in terms of who benefits and who does not, who advances and who is left behind. And it's not as though any of these things were a surprise, but there is nothing like a pandemic to place into really stark relief those disparities that cost people their lives. I did not watch the briefing yesterday because there's a limit to how much of those briefings I can tolerate. But I have to say that in reading back some of it, I was very grateful that Dr. Fauci talked a lot and very specifically about these health disparities. And he is a person who has had a lot of experience in watching what happens when a pandemic, an epidemic, an overwhelming new disease takes over the landscape, and what happens to those people who are thought of as less than and who are not important. He was an early researcher in the fight against HIV, and he remembers what it was like when people were scandalized by the disease, were unwilling to allow anybody anywhere near them, and how gay people were stigmatized in ways that some of us who are younger can't imagine. But those of us who were alive during those days remember quite well. I still have this terrible memory of my college friend, Jules, who I'd heard was in the hospital with this disease that nobody understood. And so I went to the hospital to see him. And what I remember is that no one would come near him and that he was lying on a gurney in the hallway of the hospital. And he could barely talk. And I held his hand and told him I was thinking about him and praying for him. And the look in his eyes of utter loneliness was something that has stayed with me for many years. Nobody really understood what was going on then. And a lot of people didn't care. But even then, there were brave, wonderful people who worked and fought. But in between, we lost a lot of people. I lost a lot of people that I loved. This is similar. It is not yet stigmatized to the degree that HIV was, but it is one that is putting in stark relief all the things about our culture and our society and all of the horrifying inequities that many of us have devoted our lives to fighting in one way or another. And so I think it's important for those of us who are religious leaders, those of us who aspire to be religious leaders, to be mindful of the totality of what it is that we're struggling against, to be mindful of the principalities and powers that make this especially frightening now. There are lots of people who are cheerleading us through this. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I think that there is a real need for people to keep our spirits up to some degree, to talk about the ways in which progress is being made, the ways in which people are working around the clock all over the world, that in the midst of this really terrible situation, that the usual boundaries that scientists might otherwise observe have given way to this worldwide cooperative effort where people are sharing gene sequences and research that they've done themselves and put it together with people that they've never met in an effort to find antibody tests, vaccines, other things that will stand against this illness. We shouldn't forget those things. It's important. But we shouldn't allow ourselves to be lulled to sleep by happy talk. I think it's important for us to be clear that even though most of us will survive this, all of us won't. All of us already aren't. And we do an injustice to the people whose lives have been lost and whose lives will be lost if we pretend that everything's going to go back to the way it was. It can't go back to the way it was, and it shouldn't. The way it was is the reason that Black people are dying at twice the rates of other people in Chicago. The way it was is why a policeman in Baltimore was walking through a neighborhood that he patrolled yesterday, and when one of the neighbors said something to him, began coughing all over these Black residents. Now, you know that's uncivilized and ridiculous, but that's the way it is. And it can't stay that way. We can't go back to these things. Um, we can't go back to a higher unemployment rate for people of color, even in what was until recently, for many people, a really good economy. Um, we actually don't know where we're going right now in ways that a lot of people who have studied lots of different parts of the economy, social structures, other things, we don't really know as much as people say we know. And if you are a person of faith, you have a few more tools to deal with that reality. It's frightening, but I think that one of the ways we get through something, in whatever ways we get through it, is to be realistic and to prepare ourselves for a changed reality and to hold on to the things that last, to hold on to our families and to hold on to our friends and to hold on to our principles and to hold on to a vision of a world that is not yet a reality, but could be if we're willing to work for it. I think one of the hardest things for me is that I can't be hands on somewhere right now. That's the part of me that wants to go volunteer someplace, and the part of me that wants to um, go and work in a hospital somewhere as a chaplain, a per diem chaplain. Who's going to look after those doctors and nurses and people who are seeing things that they never expected to see in their careers? Our chaplains who are already working in these hospitals are exhausted, and they aren't even able to be with people at a time when people need companionship. They aren't always able to be with patients who are dying. So I want to I want to run into places and do things, and that is my little neuroses. But I think that all of us feel called to do more than we're doing. But it's hard to do in a isolation uh, time. So I've been looking for small things to do. I've pulled out my sewing machine, and all my friends who know how bad I am at crafts um, are probably laughing. But I have been poring over all these different patterns for do it yourself masks and masks with filters and other things. I think that every one of us is probably having some version of my little obsession right now. Um, God bless those of us who have more skill than I do. I'm going to call some of them, and I see you over there, Kim. So I'm probably going to call you today about my sewing machine. Um, and I laugh about it, but the truth is that I think everybody wants so badly to be productive, to be part of the solution. And I think that those of us who are religious leaders, who are faithful people, are more prone to that than they usually are. So I think that we should be uh, kind to ourselves and to one another as we struggle to figure out what our role can be right now. Um, and that we cast our net broadly to think of ways in which we might be of service at a time when there is so much that needs to be done. Keeping in mind that some of us are more at risk than others. That's the other thing I really am struggling with. I am in a high risk group because I am over 60. I find that just unimaginable, but here we are. And I'm having to temper my usual, well, let's go do something energy with, well, no, we have to have a seat for the time being. It's one reason that these Facebook Live chats are helpful. I get to connect to people in the Star King community and beyond. I get to encourage our students and our faculty and staff, and to praise them for continuing to work and to teach and to study, because the world does need the gifts that you have. And we will be able, in some way or another, to use them. I'm especially mindful of that this week. For our Christian siblings, this is the holiest week of the year. Tomorrow will be Holy Thursday, and Sunday will be Easter Sunday. For our Jewish siblings, it is Passover, and so good Pesach to them. In a couple of weeks, will mark the start of Ramadan. And there are other religious traditions that have important moments, because it's spring. And at this time of year, there are many religious traditions that celebrate the coming of the light and the changing of the world. The world still needs to be changed. And your particular faith stance, I think, is important for you as an individual and for your community, but not as important as the reality that the world does need to change, and that there are many ways and many paths that happens. We here at Star King work very hard to help those who study here to identify that path and to walk it with integrity and with strength and with a step leavened with humor, and to participate in the world with joy. That matters too. There have been lots of goofy memes that people have been putting all over Facebook and other social media. And they may seem trivial, but I think that that's just as important as any of the other work that we do. Because in order to work for the long haul, to be able to walk the long road, there needs to be some moments of joy and humor and chances to laugh out loud. We can't all just watch the daily briefings and listen to the death tolls, because for a while those numbers are only going to go up. And so it's important to take a moment to connect with our friends on social media, to see what foolish memes they're posting. I horrified all my friends last week when the meme of the week was, or the question on Facebook was, listing the food that you don't like that all your other friends like. And people had all kinds of really interesting things that they were listing. And I just listed kale many, many, many times and added okra at the end, which proceeded to amuse all of my friends and engender a debate about how to cook it, what you ought to do to it. I'm letting them have that debate because I'm not in it, but it was fun to do. And there are lots of little things like that. It's also a way of reminding yourself who your friends are, where your friends are, what they're up to, getting to see their little posts and to connect, even for a moment. I want to thank you for being online today, or watching this later on today. I want to say hi to folks who are online, and hi Gary and Sophia and Laura, Kim. It's good that you were here to be with us. As I always do, I want to end with a time of meditation and prayer. So I hope that you'll join me. Gracious Spirit of all life, God of many names and one abundant love, we are still in the midst of this pandemic, still in the center of the storm, where in some places it looks quiet, and in some places the storm is raging, and in some places the worst is yet to come. We continue to be in awe of the frontline workers who risk everything for our health and our safety. Help them to stand strong. Give them an extra measure of love and courage as they work to save those people who are at death's door. Give them the courage to keep coming back into those ICUs, to keep going into rooms where people are in a life and death struggle, and to stand with people who may be transitioning from this world to the next with only their hands to hold. Bless all those who are losing people from this pandemic and who don't even have the capacity to say goodbye. Comfort them, stand with them, embrace them with your love so that they might feel a little less bereft in this tragic, tragic moment. Bless all those who are taking great strides to lead in this time. To every governor, every mayor, every civic leader who is working in cooperation with others to bring supplies and equipment to support those frontline workers in their work. Help those of us who are at home. Remind us that we are doing a great thing, even though it feels incredibly dull. Remind us all that we are helping to flatten the curve. Remind us that it is our privilege to stay at home when so many people are not able to stay at home. Help and protect those frontline workers outside the hospital, the grocery clerks, the stock people, the forklift drivers, and all those who are delivering packages, making up packages, fulfilling orders, doing all the things that help the culture move ahead in this frightening time. Bless our families, whether they are near to us or far away, as they struggle with their own fears and their own anxieties, and perhaps those who are ill as well. We ask a special blessing to every single person struggling with this disease everywhere in the world. And for those of you who are ill, who may not have COVID-19, but have your own health struggles now, and perhaps are living with extra fear. We pray for those who are homeless, who have no roof over their head, and who must fear this disease in addition to all the other fears that they have. Help us to build and create a world in which no one is without a home, no one is without someone to care for them, no one is without enough food, no one is without love. We ask these things in the name of all that is holy. Amen. Well, it's 11:29. Our time together is almost over. I want to thank you for joining me, and I want to encourage you to look at the Star King website. That's sksm.edu for updates about what's happening at the school and the work that we're doing. Thank you so much for being with us today. Take good care.